Hello and welcome back to Smart Money Results. In recent months, we've witnessed dramatic changes in the global financial system. Invariably, this will impact the way we approach investing. To help guide you through this new paradigm shift, please download our free report at smartmoneyresults.com/inflation. And now, here to talk to us about succeeding in the 21st century economy, irrespective of what's going on with Wall Street and the big banks, is MC Laubscher, President and CEO of Producers Wealth and creator and the host of the popular and top-rated business and investing podcast, Cash Flow Ninja. MC Laubscher has studied and interviewed billionaires in an effort to understand what they do and, more importantly, what we don't do. You definitely don't want to miss out on what he has to share. Mr. Laubscher, thank you so much for being with us at Smart Money Results.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be with you guys and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely our honor and our pleasure. Typically with our expert guests, I have some questions regarding their insights into the granularity of the economy. However, you're well known for urging people to find success regardless of the market or economic environment. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask you, what is the biggest mental impediment that prevents regular folks from achieving their financial dreams?
Yeah, I think on the mental side, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. You know, we don't learn anything about money in schools, right?
Right.
We know how to work for other people that have figured out the money game, but we don't learn anything about really how it works. So that's the big part of it, is not knowing what we don't know. And I think how the educational system is teaching folks too is they literally give you the mindset of the arrival syndrome, as a mentor of mine has called it. And it's basically like, hey, I got my high school certificate, I've got my college degree and my MBA, I'm done, I've arrived in knowledge.
Yeah.
And they completely shut themselves off at that stage. And that's the biggest mental block right there, because they don't understand that the pieces of paper that took them years to acquire really now only got them to a certain level, but you still don't know anything about money. You still don't know anything about how money works and how the money game works, because it's a game. There's rules to it. The rule book is called a tax code, of any country that you're in. So they don't know any of these things. So I think that's the biggest mental block. And unfortunately, the way that most people consume information, or where they get their information from, is just from all of the financial companies out there that, is trying to sell you products, and Wall Street, the majority of them. So that's where people get their information from, is what Wall Street wants them to know. The guys that actually know how to play the game and know the rules of the game, and the information that they receive isn't necessarily in their best interest to do and take action on. Because I've had folks too that, they say, MC, listen, I've tried to fix my mindset. I've tried to do all these things. Why is it not working? Well, it's the wrong information, right? The wrong information, wrong mentors, the wrong coaches, just the financial celebrities that were out there is telling you to, buy stocks, bonds, and mutual funds because you're going to get a 12% return every year, right?
Right.
So that's the type of information that most people consume. So I think that's the biggest mental block, is having, number one, the arrival syndrome, which really basically impedes on our learning and figuring out what we don't know. And then the information that we do get is just pure propaganda. It's just financial, basically propaganda that benefits the folks that are putting it out.
Yeah,
so that's what I would say.
That's actually a great segue to my next question. In one of your videos from the Cash Flow Ninja YouTube channel, you mentioned that college should not be free. And
yes.
One of the arguments you used was the supply-demand dynamic. With so many people, getting their pieces of paper from college education, the value of that piece of paper has to necessarily fade. Yet there's so many, as you mentioned, there's so many trades that go unserviced, so to speak. Does society need a fundamental shift in how we approach white collar and blue collar work?
Absolutely. I think that we're entering a new world right now. We are already in that new world where we're living in a skill-based economy, global economy. It's skill-based. It doesn't have anything to do with degrees and the fancy stuff we put up on our walls. So if you can invest in yourself, increase your intellectual knowledge, and your mental capital, right there through acquiring a high income skill set that produces value for the marketplace. That's the new way forward. Think about it this way, and this was a big aha moment for me putting it in these type of terms because I've known for a long time, like my opinion is, unless you're going to become a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, something that requires education through what are really existing out there. I don't see any reason why someone would invest and spend 4 years of their life to go to college right now. And here's why. We're now in 2019. These folks will be graduating, in 2022, 23?
Yeah.
They would be graduating that they're going in right now. And let's just say they're in the workforce by 2024, 25. Now, just for a moment, pause and think. 5 years ago, what did the world look like? We don't even live in the same world that we lived in 5 years ago. And
Sure.
the speed of change is just accelerating. Can you imagine what the world's going to look like in 5 years? So those folks going into college right now, besides going into so much debt, it's just nauseating. They're going to graduate into a world that they basically spent 4 years learning things that are not applicable to the marketplace in the world 4 years later. So, the whole victim culture. I mean, because that's what the majority of these colleges are. It's victim factories, blaming the rest of the world for everything that you don't have at that exact point in your life.
Yeah, right.
Kind of insane to think about it that way, but it's really the majority of it is victim factories. There are still some great schools out there. Listen, and I'm a very big proponent that humans are more important than money. I would exchange money for human capital, relationships in my network at any given point in time. So I understand if you're getting into, like a Harvard or a Princeton or any of those schools that's that element to it as well. So 4 years might not necessarily be a waste in an Ivy League school, right?
Sure.
But for the majority of people that are just trying to learn a skill and that's their goal of going to college, there's better ways of doing it and less expensive ways of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things it's sort of an irony because as we move towards an increasingly digitalized society, the people just don't seem to realize that there are incredible opportunities and benefits for so-called analog skills. For instance, I was with an entrepreneur friend of mine, and he had a Thomas Guide map, physical map, so he can know where to go for his clients. And I told him, why do you carry that thing? Because we have our smartphones and our tablets. I mean, and you have the navigation system in your car. Everything is digitalized, so you don't have to deal with the physical map. And he told me, well, what happens if the satellites go down? What if there's a blackout? What if something happens and yet you don't have anything to power those devices? You need a backup, and the physical map was his backup. And I mention that because you're so right. There's it seems like such a waste, right? Because there's plumbers that I've heard in multiple reports that blue collar work is so high in demand, and people are willing to pay ridiculous prices because everybody is being shoved into or forced into white collar work. Get your degree, no matter what. Get your degree. I was wondering, when did that shift in mentality occur?
I would say in the research that I've done, And this is kind of just a broad overview, which I don't like to do. But after the Second World War, there was a lot of men returning home from the United States that
Okay.
went to war. A lot of young men, and there wasn't enough jobs for all of them at that stage. So that's when the big push into colleges kind of started. And then it really started accelerating when all you saw in studies, like in this, like especially towards I would say the late 60s and 70s, now that you've had some men in colleges, and everybody's seen this. Oh, if you go to college, you earn, more than, someone that didn't go to college and all that kind of stuff. So there was really a push for it. And then a whole kind of industry. I mean, if you think about it, it really is a racket, because most of these schools have tax-free foundations, and they run them like hedge funds. They have all these. I mean, you were talking about the Ivy Leagues. That's like $1 billion of endowments. So
Sure.
there was a huge push to get people into colleges, and of course, when folks didn't have money, then student loans and all these programs became available through your friend the government that wants to help you.
Right.
So that forced people to go into debt to pay more. And guess what? When the loans really started accelerating, and I can't pinpoint an exact date on that. That might be something that I'd actually like to learn more about and research. But when the college loans started coming in to play, now colleges could charge more because people could just borrow money and pay it. Think about it. Like, if you really, really think about the education that folks are getting, some people walking out there $120,000 in debt for a 4-year degree. I'm like, and they don't know anything?
Right.
Who would do that? There's the reason why colleges charge that price is because they can, because people have access to the pool of money to pay that tuition. So a lot of money has been funneled into colleges, and like I said, this has resulted into a lot of them being run basically like hedge funds, tax-free hedge funds. They all brag too. I mean, this is nothing new. You go on the internet, a lot of these people brag every year about the returns that they were getting for these foundations, and I'm like, you guys do understand that it's a school, right? That you're supposed to be teaching and focusing on curriculum and teaching people skills that would help them succeed in the marketplace. But I think we've completely lost the plot. And then the whole thing, and I got a lot of like angry emails about that when I said they would even make it worse if you make college for free, is because of the supply and the demand issue. It's already an issue right now. Think about it this way. Because the big college loan rollout started, right? More people went to college, and the media was telling them that, and their parents, because, oh my goodness, grandparents and parents, you got to go to school. You got to go to college, because this is what the media and everyone has been telling you. So now everybody started taking on massive amounts of debt, go to school. Now you have all these graduates that are packing boxes at Amazon, basically, right? Because there's no jobs for them. They don't have any skills. So you have all these colleges. So what do people do after that? Oh, that's just how it is these days. You got to go get a postgrad. You got to go get an MBA or a master's, something like that. And listen, I drank the Kool-Aid up until a point too. I have an MBA in finance. So there were certain skills that I wanted to get out of that, which, some I did get. But I remember when I was done with my MBA too, it was the same thing. Now all of a sudden you have a pool of people with all these MBAs, where it used to be the MBA is almost kind of like an undergrad now, right, or a master's degree in the marketplace. And then you've got all these and again the blue, quote unquote, blue collar jobs that are out there. There's a huge need for it. I mean, look at our cities in the United States, right?
Right.
Our cities are big. There is a lot of plumbers needed. Trust me, in big major cities with all those pipes need to be replaced, electricians. The cities are old. A lot of this stuff is old. So there's a huge demand for all of this. And there just isn't enough people out there. So if there's an entrepreneurial person out there listening to this, we might almost go back to where we started, where you started working for someone. you picked a mentor and you were kind of like the understudy. You learned skills by working under them. This is what the founding fathers in the U.S. did, right? Like Ben Franklin started as an understudy to someone, right, at a printing press, learned the skill sets, and eventually opened up his own business. So became at his own printing shop. But that's kind of how it was. I kind of think that it's almost going to go back to that.
Okay.
If I just see how certain businesses already operate with, in the marketing world, even like in the digital world. And it should tell people something that Google and I think it's Facebook are not even requiring college degrees anymore,
Wow.
basically to apply to work for them. So the world is changing. The new world is here. The new economy is here. It's a skill-based global economy. It's not one where we have to flaunt and do some, pound our chest with all of our certificates and all of the great things that we learned. No, you're actually going to have to produce some value for folks out there in the world. And how are you going to do that? You need to know something, and you need to have skills that solve problems for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more because college, it's interesting, but not everybody is geared for that. And I think that and our economy would be much more efficient if we allowed people to do what they want to do, or in areas in which they have acumen toward. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this because I believe that when we force people into one singular concept or idea, that it does have dramatic consequences. For example, everybody in our audience knows about Zimbabwe and their crazy hyperinflation that occurred. But I think a lot of folks don't realize one of the catalysts that got the Zimbabwe economy to that point. And one of the negative catalysts was that the government they had, well, I guess you could call it good intentions. It is a very controversial concept, but the government essentially took land from the white farmers there and gave it back to the black people in Zimbabwe as sort of reparations, if you will. And I guess there some can make a moral argument that there is a moral component in addressing a historical wrong. But what ended up happening was that a majority of the black people that received that land, they didn't know what to do with it. They weren't farmers and they didn't want to farm. And so in many cases, not all, but in many cases when the white farmers returned, they were actually embraced by the black people that worked on that farm, because finally we have somebody that actually knows what they're doing and actually likes the occupation is fulfilling for that person. And it was not a racial thing at all. It was just that the government. Anytime the government gets involved in trying to force people to do something, it's always going to be a disaster. I was wondering if I could get a quick thought on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say this about Africa. Africa is one of the most beautiful continents out in the world. So for anyone that's never been there, I mean, it really takes a piece of your heart with you when you go there. And many folks have told me this, that, when I told them this before they went, I said, you're going to leave a piece of your heart in Africa when you go there. It just does. That's just that's just what that continent does to you. And the people in Africa, in South Africa, where I'm from, Zimbabwe, all the other countries, Southern, Northern, Central Africa, they're great people. It's regardless of their race, their tribe, wherever they are, it's just friendly people, good people. They're all just trying to, do what's best for their families and build a life, right? And build something. And I think that, the first comment that I'll also make, like the media, not just in the US, but overseas, and especially a lot of the media and folks that cover Africa, really tries to polarize a lot of people by playing off different races against each other, different tribes off against each other. because that's in their best interest, right? Because they're representing, as you mentioned, the government at that stage. A
Right.
lot of these media companies, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the government wants because that basically keeps them in control by polarizing a lot of folks, and making folks fearful. But I would say, like, in my opinion, up into the higher 90% of folks in Africa, they all get along. Like, it's crazy when you see some media coverages of stuff and then you actually go out to and visit Africa around the people. It's great people. They're friendly. They're not a racist or
Yeah.
tribalist, all this stuff. There's fringe, yes, I'll have folks obviously now jump up and say, yes, MC, but of course there's fringe elements. Of course there are a tiny percentage of the population that are troublemakers. Let's just use that word, right?
Sure. Right.
Potential troublemaking sources. Of course, yes, you get those folks everywhere, in any place. So yeah, you've got the government trying to really polarize folks, and then you have these fringe elements and again, that's not just one particular group. There's a couple of splinter group of them, different races, tribes, and so forth. Always call. I mean, that's the coverage that people see, is that small, very polarizing groups, and then also what the government puts out there. So for the majority of folks, they get along. They're great people. They're friendly people. And yes, there's been a lot of wrongs, if you want to look at it from a moral perspective, in Africa. I mean, talk about a continent that has seen a lot, right?
Yeah.
And this was even before the Europeans got there, because it's not just the Europeans now, that people, that's the low-hanging fruit, right?
Right.
So there's been a lot of wrongs done for centuries there by many different people to each other. It's got a very sad history, overall. So that brings us to, like, the comment that you just made of what's going on there too. There's always going to be, because there has been so much conflict and so much, how can I say, conquest by one tribe over another, or by Europeans over Africans and so forth. There's always going to be friction, and there's always going to be historical wrongs that need to be remedied in some shape or form. There actually, if you really think about, and most people don't know about it because the media doesn't necessarily want to cover it, there are actually programs, and I was just speaking about South Africa now. There was a program, for example, most folks are familiar with apartheid, terrible, dark time in that country's history. So most folks are familiar about that. Most folks are also familiar that there was very bad things done, and a lot of bad things happened. Like, for example, people were forcibly removed from certain areas and relocated to another area. So what happened when apartheid was done? There's actually government programs in place, and was put in place to come up with a peaceful resolution to that. To say, hey, this is a piece of land where somebody was forcibly removed. They can go back and put a claim against that. They would come in, and a settlement would be arranged, whether the farmer would get a free and fair price for the property, because he might have just bought it at that stage, right? He just bought it. He didn't get that through the forcible removal.
Sure.
So anyway, there was. I guess what I'm trying to say is there were ways that this was done, and this was settled, and there were programs for it. Obviously, that doesn't make the news, and there's fringe elements that feel that this wasn't done at a rapid enough, fast enough pace. All these other little details, but. What I would say is, yeah, there was a lot of wrongs done there. Were there programs and certain things put in place to right that? Absolutely. But the polarizing thing, of course, is there. And then the last thing I would also might comment on that is farming is very hard.
Yeah.
In a certain part of Africa, it's very, very, very hard. So regardless of your heritage, your what the color of your skin is or the tribe that you're on, just give it farm to me somewhere there, and it would be a disaster because I just don't have the skills, right? So I would just say also that it takes a while. And again, this is another thing that would not be reported in the media, but there are actually farmers out there that want to build, this. They want to build this South Africa and the country. So they're helping folks and educating and teaching them the skills to and eventually take over a farm. So I know there's certain programs out there that's not going to be covered in the media because that doesn't play into the narrative.
Sure.
So there are folks on the ground, albeit a small group of folks, trying to change things. And that's where it all just starts. It starts with the individual. So, it's a very complicated issue. It's like I said, there's a history of complicated stuff there. But I would, I would just say there's a lot of different things that are involved with it. But in the end, I think, if we look at the humans down there, wonderful people, great people, looking to just do the best for themselves and their families. And I think a lot of folks are getting information that's not necessarily accurate and reflecting what's actually happening on the ground there.
I wanted to shift the discussion over to personal development. And in another one of your videos, you talk about how people today are too focused on output and not enough on outcomes. Could you explain to our audience what that looks like in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of people talk about hustle, hard work, going hard.
Yeah.
Like just going until you basically keel over and fall over, right?
Right.
And then there's another group of folks that say, they want to do almost nothing, just work smart, sit on a beach somewhere, take selfies and drink cocktails, right? That's the two groups of people. So how is that fused? And the folks that I've interviewed on my show, the Cashflow Ninja, so I look at, so what do successful people do? Because you have one school of thought of people just saying you have to run 160 miles an hour until you basically fall over and get a heart attack. And you've got other folks that say, hey, you just have to work smarter and lie on a beach and drink cocktails. Well, what I found in the middle is the very successful people work hard on smart things. So they don't necessarily just work hard. They just don't necessarily just work smart, but they work hard on smart things. So that's what I would say is kind of a blend of that. So when you do that and focus on strategy, systems, processes, and putting that all together, now all of a sudden it's producing the outcomes that you wanted, right? If you're just focusing on, I got to work, I got to do this. We've all heard the saying too of staying busy. But and there are some folks that have even said busyness is laziness, right? You're actually lazy because you're busy all the time. And trust me, full transparency, that was me at one stage in my life too, right? I was very, very busy, but if I really look back and I want to be honest with myself, I was actually pretty lazy. So I would just say that work hard on smart things, and that's going to create the outcomes that you want. And that's going to give you a more outcome-focused approach. And there's other things that tie into that too. Obviously, you have to build the life that you want, or build a vision for the life that you want, and then build the business and put investments into that vision. When you're just starting with the business and investments, then eventually you might create a prison for yourself, running your business and managing investments. And that's the prison that you wanted to escape by starting a business and by doing certain investments.
I was wondering because you're so right. In corporate America, because I was once doing the cubicle warrior thing, and just climbing the ladder, and well, it just seemed like when I look back on it in retrospect that we were just doing busy work. We were just creating work to give the impression that we were productive when actually we're just putting numbers on a spreadsheet. I mean, it just sort of our time when I look back at it was very inefficient. I was wondering, is this idea of an outcome-based strategy, is that taking hold now in corporate America, or are still the majority of the companies just doing the busy work?
Yeah, companies have changed quite a bit, and I still have folks that I talk to that are in corporate America, and I know a lot of folks that own their businesses that are kind of corporately run. That has changed quite a bit too. Because of the economy that we're in, the skill base, there's a lot of outsourcing, which used to be a bad and ugly term and a four-letter word in a lot of conversations, but a lot of stuff is outsourced locally in the United States, right? I work virtually with folks and outsource projects to folks outside of my company in the United States. They're my partners. So because companies have changed a little bit of that way, yeah, I think they are becoming more outcome focused of in many different ways, and not just creating another job and then keeping that person busy because they don't really have a lot to do. It's more, how do we achieve certain things? You're going to have leaner organizations. You're going to have a lot more partnerships instead of just creating a behemoth with 500 employees. You could probably run that company with less than 100 people and partnering with a lot of other folks that have the complementary skill sets in their businesses outside of yours.
Going back to you've studied a lot of about billionaires and analyzed their behaviors. I was wondering, is there a personal like practice or habit that that is common among billionaires that we can adopt in our own lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've identified four pillars, and I call it the four pillars of the business of multiplying capital. So, and this is just through, I've interviewed over 500 cash flow ninjas, as I call them on my show, very successful entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and wealth experts. And I've studied these folks, and through almost 2 decades now. And they all really have these four pillars in place. And the first one, I call them the 4 times CC. That's kind of the algorithm, if you will. And it's the first pillar is cash creation. Second pillar is cash capture. Then cash flow creation is the third pillar, and the fourth pillar is cash control. So the first one is cash creation. Everyone has to create cash in a certain way, and a lot of these folks have their businesses, right? So if you're listening to this, if you have a job, you can start a side hustle. You could start an Amazon business. Huge opportunity there. There's a lot of folks starting Airbnb businesses. So that's cash creation, is combining your intellectual and your mental capital with relationship capital to get financial capital. And then this is how you produce and create value for the world. Everyone does it in a different capacity. If you're a surgeon listening to this, that's how you create cash, right? You're a surgeon. That's your high income skill set.
Right.
So you have to make money. And the second part then is protecting it, cash capture, capturing the value that you've created in the world. And then there's 3 pieces of that. You have to recapture some cash. There's a lot of cash flow leaks, money that we're unknowingly losing through overpaying taxes, opportunity cost, overpaying for insurance, interest, and so forth. So that's cash recapture, then cash automation, and then cash flow banking, which is a strategy that we use of where to warehouse our money, right? One of the preferred vehicles is whole life insurance, a dividend-paying whole life insurance with a mutual insurance company. So we call it cash flow banking. It's infinite banking, bank on yourself. There's different terms for it. So that's under cash capture, the second pillar. The third pillar is cash flow creation. There's an art and a science to how people do this. Whether it's businesses, real estate, and I mean, there's so many different niches in real estate, whether it be single family, multifamily, mobile home park, assisted living facilities. There's other ones, ATMs, energy cash flow. Merchant accounts, notes. We could go on and on. There's just so many ways that people create cash flow and different ways to create income streams and cash flow. That's under that pillar. And then the fourth pillar is then protecting it, cash control. You got to protect everything that you've created, captured, and created cash flow on. You've got to protect all of that through asset protection and through proper estate planning and legacy strategies. So all of them have those 4 pillars in place. I like to keep things simple, so those are like the 4 pillars that I've identified and the framework that we use. And then there's different ways to goal set within that framework. Very wealthy folks have different levels. So the first one is financial security. Then it's financial independence, then financial freedom, then financial significance. So financial security is having certain things in place. Financial independence is when the cash flow of your businesses and your investments actually exceed your living expenses. And then you, of course, financial freedom, we have a way that we formalize a number, But it really boils down to when money no longer becomes a reason why and why not you do something. And then financial significance is like, what is the bigger picture here? That's when a lot of folks have charities, foundations, and so forth. And by the way, you could start that on that significant path today, just in smaller steps, right? If you don't have money, contribute your time. If you have a little bit of money, start small, right? But that's kind of the I would say the scorecard and the framework is that 4 pillars of the business of multiplying capital.
Usually with people who invest, they, especially with our audience, a lot of our folks, they love investing in gold and silver, but these are typically quote unquote passive investments. You pay some money, you get an asset, and then it sits there. I was wondering, is there a way to take that passiveness of such assets and then convert it to or redirect it to cash flow generating businesses or assets?
Yeah, so I love talking about it, collateralizing assets, which basically to me means you taking one asset to acquire another asset. So for example, folks might already be doing this and they don't even, when I say the word collateralization, they're like, what does that mean? But I'm like, you're already doing it. If you have a HELOC and like, let's just say you have a property and you take a HELOC against that to acquire another property,
Yeah.
you collateralize the equity in the one house to acquire another house. You used one asset because you still have that first house, and now you've leveraged it to acquire another house, right?
Right.
Most people do it with their businesses. Think about it. They have credit lines at the bank. How did the bank just extend you a credit line? No, they looked at receivables, they look at the assets of the business, and they look at equipment, all the other things that you have in the business. And based on that, they give you a credit line. So you've technically collateralized your business to leverage capital in your business to grow your business, hire more employees, finance things, and you could actually use that. There's some folks that have taken liquidity from their business to invest, right? Maybe you buy a building for the business. Now you have a real estate paying you cash flow because you have a renter. Your business is renting that. So there's already ways that people are doing it. You could do the same thing with stocks, asset-based lending. You could get a loan secured and collateralized by certain stock portfolios at brokerage houses. You could do it with gold and silver. There's certain firms out there that would actually give you a loan secured by your gold and silver. So think about it this way. If you have gold and silver, which I look at as wealth insurance,
Yes.
And I'm a huge fan of gold and silver, by the way, especially in the world that we live in, that you could, instead of that just sitting in a safe somewhere, you could actually leverage that to acquire another hard asset, let's just say real estate that's paying rent. That is a hedge against inflation, because that's why you hold gold and silver the majority of time in the first place, right? It's been money for centuries. It's a hedge against currencies and then also inflation. So that's a great way of doing it. It's called commodity-backed finance. You could do it with art as well. If you have pieces of art, you can actually, expensive pieces, you could collateralize the art through commodity-backed finance. People used to do this in the 70s and 80s with CDs. Now they don't pay anything, but when they used to pay double digits, folks, actually a coach that I had in the early 2000s, someone that was my coach shared that strategy with me and said, hey, in the 70s and 80s, what they did is they just put money in the bank in CDs because it was paying them 10% plus, and then they would go to the same bank and get a loan secured by that CD to invest in real estate. So now you've got the CD and the real estate, and the cash flow from the real estate pays off the CD. I do the same thing with insurance, with a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy structured very, very specifically with a mutual insurance carrier, structured to the infinite banking concept. So I've been doing that for almost a decade, basically, using the whole life insurance, collateralizing the cash value in the whole life insurance through a policy loan to invest in real estate. So there's many different ways that you, number one, have assets already that you can access liquidity from to acquire other assets. Now I'm going to say this. There's a company that actually collateralizes Bitcoin.
Really? Wow.
You know, so you can put your Bitcoin up as collateral to take a loan secured by your Bitcoin. So you could actually buy Bitcoin, put it up for collateral, and invest in hard assets, either gold or silver, or for wealth insurance, or acquire real estate. Think about that. How to use your Bitcoin to buy real estate. There you go. Again, all of these different collateralization strategies have different risks, right? The reason why I'm a big fan of the whole life insurance part, and also the gold and silver part, is the whole life insurance. There's guarantees on it every single year that your cash value increases, right? Regardless of what happens in the stock market or the economy. Gold and silver, is also not. It's not Bitcoin. If you look at the volatility wall, there's risk there too, but there's a smaller portion of it that I would expose myself to. The other stuff, there's just too many risks. So please know all the risks. Like stocks, you're going to get margin calls, right? HELOCs, they might call your HELOC. There's many different things that you have to take into consideration. They all have risks that can be mitigated, and you can incorporate those risk management strategies in your overall wealth strategy. But just think of the many different things that you can do, of resources that you already have available.
I was wondering, so on a personal note, when I was climbing the ladder of corporate America, I always hated the fact that I'd get my paycheck and the government, for my benefit, would take a good chunk out of my paycheck. And the big wake up call for me was when an entrepreneur friend showed me that by owning a business, you could potentially make a boatload more money and yet pay fewer taxes than the working stiff. And I'm curious, what was your wake-up call that made you realize that you need to do things differently from what society teaches?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in South Africa, I've always, I went through a big wake-up call there, just seeing, living through the change, in government and so forth, and realizing that everything I've ever been told in my life is a lie.
Yeah.
And that, on both sides, the old and the new government. And then basically on that end, then you go down the rabbit hole, because you're like, well, if I was lied by everyone about what happened in my country, what's currently happening in my country, what other lies are out there? And then, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, obviously, Robert Kiyosaki's I think it's the best-selling personal finance book of all time.
Yes.
Which then, I think he mentioned G. Edward Griffin. I read The Creature from Jekyll Island. When I read that book, and that's one book I would highly recommend your listeners and viewers get their hands on, because it really tells you everything that you need to know about money, how money works, the money game, the money system. Once you read that book, you're like, holy moly, like, I got to make some changes, because this basically tells you the game. And there is a game. And as I mentioned, the rule is the tax code. And that's to tie into your point is, people say, how do people make more money every year and pay less taxes? Well, they know the rules, the rule book, and they have a team around them that knows it too. And they make sure that their overall strategy is in alignment with the rule book. Because think about it. Most people are, number one, they hate taxes. It's like a dirty word, a 4-letter word for them. They think of all ways not to pay taxes. And my philosophy is, hey, this is the greatest opportunity. Like, if you think about it, the IRS code and the tax code is one of the greatest things out there, because it essentially, for folks that have businesses and are investors, it tells you, hey, if you go out there and produce value for the world, you get to keep more of the money, because you actually are a producer and a creator. So you get to keep more of your money, number one, so that you would have more money to put back into your business and back in your investments to keep making more money. So back on that 4 pillars, if you think about it from the cash creation part, if you're producing value for the marketplace, your products and services, you get rewarded by the government, because they know that they need business people and entrepreneurs, because what do entrepreneurs do? They solve problems. There's a lot of problems out there to solve. and the government's not going to want to solve them. So they reward folks that solve them. And then, by the way, if you then take the money that's left over, what you produced and created and what you consumed, and you take that then money and direct it into more areas of value, housing, real estate. Government doesn't want to become a landlord, so they, and there's a huge, obviously, opportunity in assisted living facilities. There's a large population that's aging, that's going to need places to go to. So what do? They incentivize folks to put their money there, and they get rewarded for it. So you just think of all the different things in the tax code. So I enjoy taxes. I never thought I would say this ever, by the way. I enjoy it because it's a scorecard. If you want to look at it this way, it's a scorecard that tells you, hey, you produced and created value for the world, and what was left over, you directed your capital into more areas that produced value for the world. And because of that, you get rewarded and paid almost no taxes. If you had a high tax bill, then I would probably look at that and say, hey, I need to rethink this and figure out how to produce and create more, and how to direct my capital into more areas that provide more value for other folks. So it's just a different way of looking at it, instead of being, scared or, hating it and so forth. So that's why it doesn't, and regardless of what country you're in, it's the same thing, So I would just say, from a tax standpoint, yeah, there is a way to make more money every single year and pay less taxes if you know the game and you know the rule book and you have a team of folks helping you implement and execute on this.
This is actually, in my opinion, this is one of the most important lessons that, you hit it right on the head, because you can tell who is a producer, who is not, simply by talking to people and asking their opinions about taxes. Because you'll notice that almost everybody, like 80% of the population, when they talk about taxes, they always look forward to their tax return as if it was income. And I keep telling people, no, it's your own money that the government is simply returning back to you interest free. But people don't think about that. Oh, it's another paycheck. It's not another paycheck. The government is just returning your money. And in some states, they actually tax that as income. So it's a double dipping in some states, like California. I think right there, that mentality is certainly one of the signals that defines who actually gets it in terms of the financial system, who doesn't. Because you're right. I mean, if you are a producer and if you do create value, actually the tax code is very, very fair in this country. I think a lot of people just don't realize that.
Yeah, and if it becomes unfair, guess what? Then people just move.
Exactly.
And they restructure what they're doing, right? There's a ton of folks going to Puerto Rico. So yeah, it's, you can either be negative about it, or just learn the game and then figure out that taxes is a very big part of it. Debt is a very big part of it. Instead of swimming upstream and protesting the Fed and trying to shut down the IRS and all that stuff, it's like, no, I think you're missing the whole point. Just learn how it works and then go with the flow. Obviously, you understand what is going on, and you could play the game then how it's supposed to be played. Because as you mentioned, yeah, I mean, it's actually, from a tax standpoint, yeah, I mean, it's just a road map, basically, and a guide telling you, if you do these certain things, we'll reward you.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question: how far do you think the Springboks can go in the World Cup this year?
That's a great question. New Zealand, look, over the weekend, for my fellow ruggers out there, New Zealand looked really, really good. There's 4 teams left: New Zealand, England, Wales, and South Africa. And I would say, anyone out of the 4 on any day could probably win it. It's going to be, teams that, this is now the big pressure stages of the tournament.
Sure.
So teams that have essentially won the tournament before, which has been South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and England, all had one thing in common, and that was handling those pressure. Great defenses, obviously, but the pressure is what gets a lot of teams. So I would say out of those four teams that are left, I mean, anything can happen. I'm the worst crystal ball guy on the planet. That's why when it comes to markets, economy, I'm not a good crystal ball guy, even rugby. So I would just say, I think they can win it. South Africa can win it, but I also think New Zealand can win it. England look very good as well. I think they can definitely win it. They have a phenomenal coach that I really admire. And when I got involved coaching a little bit of rugby, I used a lot of his stuff. And of course, Wales can win it too. They've been very good. They've been the number one team in the world at some stage this year as well. So it's going to be exciting. I'm super excited for next weekend to see what'll happen. So hopefully the Boca will pull it through. So go Boca.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wildly informative discussion, but unfortunately, there's just not enough time in a single sitting to capture everything you have to say. But before we go, was there anything that I missed regarding your work or any upcoming events that you would like to share with us?
No, that's it. So if folks want to check us out at Cashflow Ninja, I have interviewed over 500 Cashflow Ninjas about all different ways to create cash flow and different wealth strategies. So, we've had a ton of folks on there, talking from how to cash flow your gold and silver, covered Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, covered all different niches of real estate, many different businesses that folks can start, many different paper asset classes. So if that interests them, they can just check us out at cashflowninja.com. If they want to touch base on some of the other strategies that I do regarding the insurance strategy, it's called Your Own Banking System, because it's just setting up your own banking system, like what is set up globally. So, but I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, MC, thank you again for being with us at Smart Money Results.
Awesome.